What happens when one of America's most beloved television daughters quietly becomes part of Hollywood history, only to leave behind a love story, a friendship with Elvis Presley, and memories that lasted for generations? This past Saturday, in a quiet home in Los Angeles, surrounded by the people who loved her most, Shelley Fabares passed away at 82 years old. And somewhere in that room was the man who'd spent more than 40 years by her side, Mike Farrell, the actor generations of television viewers knew as Captain B.J. Honeycutt on MAS*H, now facing the one role no amount of rehearsal ever prepares a person for. The statement his family finally released was brief, dignified, and heartbreakingly plain. For anyone who grew up watching her sing on a black-and-white television set, or fall for Elvis Presley on the big screen, or trade quips with Craig T. Nelson decades later, that description will feel exactly right. This is the story of the girl from Santa Monica who became America's daughter, America's sweetheart, and finally, quietly, one half of one of Hollywood's most enduring real-life love stories. Shelley Fabares, born Michelle and Marie Fabares on January 19, 1944, in Santa Monica, California, seemed almost destined for the camera from the very start. She began acting at just 3 years old, made her official television debut at 10 in a 1954 episode of The Loretta Young Show. And by the time she was a young teenager, she was already sharing the screen with Annette Funicello in Walt Disney's beloved 1958 serial Annette. Show business, in a sense, ran in the family. Her aunt was Nanette Fabares, the Tony-winning stage legend and comic partner to Sid Caesar. And young Shelley grew up watching a family member navigate exactly the kind of career she herself would soon step into. That step came in 1958, when, at just 14 years old, she was cast as Mary Stone, the bright, endlessly relatable daughter on the Donna Reed Show. For 7 seasons, audiences across America watched Shelley Fabares grow up in real time on their television screens. And by the early 60s, she wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a full-blown teen idol, the kind of star who received sacks of fan mail every week from viewers who felt like they genuinely knew her. It was during those Donna Reed Show years that Shelley Fabares became something even rarer than a beloved television daughter, a genuine chart-topping recording artist almost by accident. In 1962, her single Johnny Angel shot straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, eventually selling over 1 million copies and earning a gold certification. It's the song people still remember most vividly, decades later, the one that made teenage boys across the country feel hypnotized by her voice, the one mothers dance their babies to in living rooms, the kind of song that gets passed down in memory from one generation to the next. She followed it with more chart entries that same year, Johnny Loves Me and The Things We Did Last Summer, proving Johnny Angel was no fluke. There's a small, funny story from decades later that fans of the show still love to retell. At a 2011 reunion of the show's surviving cast, Fabares recalled being nervous about having to dance for a particular scene, and Donna Reed herself tried to calm her nerves by admitting, with a straight face, that there were 3 things she personally couldn't do: swim, dance, or act, and yet somehow she'd built an entire career doing exactly those 3 things anyway. It was the kind of dry, self-deprecating humor that Fabares clearly carried with her for the rest of her life. The ability to laugh gently at the absurdity of show business, even while thriving inside it. Beyond her signature role, Fabares kept working steadily across television's golden decades, popping up in beloved series like The Twilight Zone, The Incredible Hulk, The Rockford Files, Fantasy Island, Mork and Mindy, and The Love Boat, the kind of reliable guest appearances that made her a familiar, comforting face in households across the country for generation after generation, whether or not viewers always remembered exactly which show they'd first fallen for her on. Nothing captures who Shelley Fabares really was quite like the way she talked about Elvis Presley, a friendship fans still bring up in her memory more than almost anything else in her filmography. She met him on the set of Girl Happy in 1964, and she described that first encounter with a clarity that hadn't faded even decades later. She remembered standing on the soundstage when something shifted in the room. Everyone simply stopped, and there he was walking in, doing nothing at all except existing, carrying a kind of presence she said she'd genuinely never witnessed in another human being before or since. She'd expected to feel nothing, she admitted, since her heart at the time belonged to Jimmy Stewart, not Elvis. Instead, the two of them simply clicked, the way she put it, the way some people just recognize each other instantly without knowing why. She went on to make 3 films with him in total: Girl Happy, Spin Out, and Clambake, more movies than any other leading lady in his career, and she insisted again and again that despite what tabloids loved to speculate, there was never a romance between them. Every woman around him, she said, seemed to gravitate toward him like radar, and he knew it. So the fact that Shelley genuinely liked him without any of that undertow seemed to let him exhale a little. She recalled one afternoon at the MGM commissary, deep into what she called the lowest point of his career, right as the Beatles had swept the entire country's attention away from him. She was mid-lunch, back to the door, when the room simply erupted, hundreds of people abandoning their tables at once, rushing toward the glass entrance where Elvis stood peering in from outside. He never even came inside. He just looked, then vanished, and 700 people had still sprinted toward him anyway. She said she never fully understood how a 19-year-old boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, was supposed to survive that kind of adoration, over and over, for a lifetime, and that she genuinely ached for what eventually happened to him. Her favorite memory of him wasn't glamorous at all. It was the final scene they ever filmed together on Clambake, a scripted gag where her character opens Elvis's wallet expecting to see his driver's license, only to find a photograph the crew had secretly swapped in, a wildly unflattering picture of an elderly, toothless woman. The take that made it into the film shows Fabares laughing so hard she can barely speak, and Elvis nearly doubled over the steering wheel beside her, caught slightly out of focus because he couldn't stop shaking with laughter either. Decades later, she still called it one of her favorite photographs in the world. "I miss him every day," she said plainly, no embellishment needed. Around that same period, in 1964, she married music producer Lou Adler, a marriage that would eventually end in divorce, years before the far more lasting partnership that awaited her. It began, almost invisibly, back in 1970, when she first crossed paths with Mike Farrell, the actor television audiences knew as Captain BJ Honeycutt on MASH. On a Los Angeles set, two working actors with no particular reason to expect anything permanent between them. Nothing came of it right away. Life carried both of them in different directions for years, through other marriages, other heartbreaks, and other careers taking shape at their own separate paces. It wasn't until years later, after Farrell's own marriage had ended and Fabares had long since moved past her own first marriage, that the two of them reconnected, and this time, everything clicked into place. Shelley Fabares married Mike Farrell in 1984, and what followed was more than 4 decades of a devotion so total it eventually became, in its own quiet way, one of her favorite stories to tell. During the long, frightening years when doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with her liver, both she and Farrell carried medical pagers everywhere, waiting for the call that a donor organ had finally become available. She used to joke that after the 7th or 8th wrong number woke them up in a panic, she turned to her husband and said they needed to come up with a better system, or one of them was going to die of a heart attack before the transplant ever happened. It's the kind of gallows humor only two people who trust each other completely can share in the middle of something that frightening. There's another story from that same period that says even more about who they were together. Midway through her illness, exhausted and weakened, she sat in a hair salon chair one afternoon, admiring another client's wildly dyed, spiked, hot pink hair, and impulsively asked her own stylist to do the same to her. She described what happened next as one of the most liberating moments of her entire life. For the first time since she'd started working at age 3, she said nobody in the room could tell her no, you can't do that, because she was quite literally dying, and if not now, when? She thought of an old poem about a warrior riding into battle with plume afloat, and decided that whatever happened next, she would go out exactly the same way. When she finally showed her husband, half expecting the wildly conservative dresser to recoil, Mike Farrell loved it instantly, and kept encouraging her to redo it for years afterward whenever the color began to fade. It's a small, glowing detail, but it says everything about a marriage built not on performance, but on two people simply, fully accepting each other exactly as they were. The physical recovery after her transplant in October of 2000 took years, she said, and it wasn't until nearly 3 years out from the surgery that something unexpected happened. She became deeply depressed, and then, cruelly, depressed about being depressed, furious with herself for feeling anything but gratitude after being handed what she called an entire second chance at life. It was only later that she understood what was actually happening. She hadn't been in denial about her illness, not exactly, but her body had spent every ounce of available energy simply healing. And it was only once the healing was mostly finished that the emotions she'd been holding at bay finally arrived, delayed but unavoidable, demanding to be felt. She never once described it as weakness. If anything, the way she spoke about it years later carried something closer to wonder, a genuine curiosity about how the human mind protects itself for exactly as long as it needs to, and not one moment longer. And then there is the story that, in the days since her passing, has taken on a weight almost nobody could have anticipated when she first told it. While working on the set of Coach, during the depths of her illness, Shelley Fabares said she had what she believed, in her own words, was an out-of-body experience, a moment where she felt herself quite clearly beginning to leave. She didn't see a light, she said, and she wasn't moving toward anything in particular. She was simply going. And what struck her most, she explained, was how beautiful it was, how far beyond peaceful, beyond even her own understanding of love, an all-encompassing warmth she'd only ever heard other people try and fail to fully describe. In that moment, she said only two things made her sad. She worried about whoever might walk into the green room and find her gone. And she thought of her husband, wishing desperately she could tell him thank you and love him one more time. She came back, obviously, that time. But she said the memory of that peace never left her, that she could still summon the feeling instantly, decades later, simply by thinking about it, and that it had permanently loosened the grip fear once held over her. She'd spent her entire life, she admitted, certain since early childhood that she would die young, convinced for reasons she could never quite explain that cancer would eventually claim her. Reaching 45, then 50, she said, felt almost like outliving her own prophecy. Reading her words now, in the days since her actual death, it is almost impossible not to feel that she had already shown us, years in advance, exactly what this moment would be like for her, gentle, enveloping, and entirely without fear. That same fearlessness, combined with that same deep tenderness, shaped the way Shelley Fabares stood by her mother through the final stages of Alzheimer's disease. Her mother, Elsa Fabares, ultimately lost her life to the illness in 1992, and the experience profoundly changed the course of Shelley's own life. Shelley and her sister spent years attempting to understand what was happening to their mother, long before doctors were able to provide a diagnosis. They watched as Elsa began underlining appointment notes with increasingly frantic and repeated exclamation points, leaving behind small handwritten signs of a mind that was gradually losing its connection to time. Earlier in the disease, her mother had once said that if she ever discovered she had Alzheimer's, she would take her own life rather than endure it. Shelley carried those words with her for years afterward, never completely certain how much her mother eventually understood about what was happening to her. Near the very end, doctors informed the family that unless Elsa began eating again, they would have to insert a feeding tube. Shelley went alone to her mother's bedside and spoke to her exactly as she always had, treating her as though she could hear and completely understand every word, despite having no way of knowing for certain whether that was true. She told her mother that if she was ready to leave, the family would stand beside her and support her through every step. But if she was not ready, Shelley explained, then she needed to begin eating again because the alternative would be a feeding tube and everything that would come with it. Her mother simply looked around the room, wearing the unfocused expression that so many people with advanced Alzheimer's eventually develop. Shelley briefly left the room and stepped into the hallway to speak with a nurse. When she returned, her mother was sitting upright and eating, something she had not done for months. Whatever Elsa genuinely understood at that moment, Shelley chose to believe that somewhere, at a level too deep to be expressed through words, her mother had heard her and had made a choice. In its own quiet and deeply personal way, it reflected the same lessons Shelley would later describe after her own encounter with death. Love can find a path through, even when the body and mind are no longer able to fully work together. During the final decades of her life, Shelley Fabares repeatedly transformed nearly every hardship she had endured into something she could give back to others. She spent 16 years working with the Alzheimer's Association, advocating for research and support in memory of her mother. She also spoke with remarkable openness and almost fearless honesty about her own illness and recovery, hoping that sharing her experience could bring comfort to someone else traveling down the same frightening road. Alongside Mike Farrell, she built a partnership that endured longer than almost anything else in her extraordinary life. Farrell was born in South St. Paul, Minnesota, and had served as a United States Marine before ever stepping onto a soundstage. He later spent 8 seasons portraying the gentle and devoted Captain B.J. Honeycutt on MASH*, a role that, alongside Alan Alda, made him one of the emotional anchors of one of television's most beloved series. The gentleness he displayed through that character was also something he carried into his life away from acting. For more than 2 decades, he served as president of Death Penalty Focus, traveling across the country to lobby and speak against capital punishment. He once described that work as something that had moved him to tears many times, sustained by the people he encountered along the way who continued fighting despite everything. That same calm, steady, and patient nature became something Shelley depended upon through every hospital pager, every waiting room, and every long night of her illness. And Farrell returned that same unwavering support to her for more than 40 years. Their marriage was built around the simple yet radical act of being completely known and completely accepted. Their relationship became a partnership that neither seemed to take for granted, even after decades together. In the family statement released this week, Shelley was remembered as a devoted wife, a cherished stepmother, as well as a daughter, sister, niece, aunt, and loyal friend. Her warmth and grace had left a lasting mark on everyone fortunate enough to know her. Her family remembered her extraordinary ability to make people feel welcomed, valued, and cared for, and promised to carry her kindness, loyalty, wit, courage, and beautiful spirit with them for the rest of their lives. They described themselves as heartbroken by her passing, yet profoundly grateful for all the years they had been given with her, finding comfort in the knowledge that her work and the memories she created with everyone who loved her would continue long after her death. Still, perhaps no tribute captures Shelley as completely as her own words, spoken years before anyone knew how much they would eventually matter, when she described what she believed awaited on the other side of a life fully lived. She said that it was beyond peaceful and beyond the love we normally understand, and that the only thing she wished for in that moment was more time to say thank you. To Mike Farrell, and to every person who ever loved Shelley from the other side of a television screen, sang along with her through Johnny Angel, watched her grow up on the Donna Reed Show, laughed with her during the beat-up gas station Maserati moment, or witnessed her holding her mother's hand through the darkest years of her life, that thank you now belongs completely to her. It belongs to the 50 remarkable years she spent giving every part of herself to others, quietly, generously, and without ever once asking for anything in return.